Good morning and welcome to the original Loretta Brown Show with my amazing producer, Benny
Hi there.
Mathers.
Good morning. Good morning. You're sliding here fairly quickly as your Facebook post shows it visually, too.
I was
it's a
blurry.
little blurry. Yeah,
I know.
You're so fast getting in here.
I was like
Don't have time for a photo.
Roadrunner.
Yeah.
Like Roadrunner. Like beep, beep, bloop, right? So drive careful out there this morning. I ran into quite a bit of traffic. And always, always be gentle with the school buses and the kids getting on that school
Yeah, you
bus.
can always phone ahead, which you did, for just to delay a little bit. We're actually still on time. It's just more of your ritual when you usually get in has been delayed, or I should say cut back a little.
I have a time,
Yeah.
I do that. I set a time like I need to be there by
Some
then.
Loretta Brown time.
It's the Loretta Brown time. And
Didn't get much of that today.
Yeah, this morning, all that is decided I needed just a couple extra moments
Right.
in my new car, Pegasus, right?
Well, Pegasus is running a little slow.
She
She needs to step her game up.
I know. I hate to say this. Betsy was a good old truck,
Yeah,
right?
but when you have Pegasus with that specific of a name too, I'm led to believe.
I think I don't know. In the Greek mythology, whoever it is that captured Pegasus had a magic golden bridle. Maybe that's what I need to do.
Or Pegasus just a baby.
Yeah, maybe she's a baby.
She needs to work on it.
Give her a moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks
fine.
for tuning in. We like to have a little bit of fun and also to connect with you. So my radio show has been around for a while. It's archived. You can always go to the archives of KKNW, the original Loretta Brown Show, and find everything there. It's free for download. You can also find more at thelorettabrownshow.com. And I'm the owner of Reiki Oasis. I've been the owner of Reiki Oasis for 23 years, and I'm only 29. I don't know how that happened, Benny. It happens.
Flies by.
Flies by.
Just like Pegasus.
Just like
Will be.
Yeah, just like Pegasus. You can find out more about me at ReikiOasis.com. You can schedule anything, everything to include workshops at schedule.ReikiOasis.com. What do we have coming up? We have a Reiki 2 class on Saturday, October 13th. This is a great class to learn about distance healing and more about energies. You learn 3 of the Reiki symbols, and you have to have taken Reiki 1 to come to this class. And I always say this, there's many, many excellent Reiki practitioners out there, and, allow yourself to be guided and directed to the one that is for you. I've been teaching Reiki for 23 years. That's right, 23 years. And I love doing it. I also have the Temple of the Divine Feminine, which is Saturday, October 20th. And this is a great monthly class for women. We do all kinds of things in there, from just having what I call girl talk to talking about the ancient mysteries and what does it really mean to be a woman in today's world. My goodness, I'm not going to bring up the news really, but there is a lot going on with the balancing of the masculine and feminine energies. And what is it that we're really here to do on planet Earth, especially at this time? I think there's might be a verse of the Bible somewhere it says there's nothing new under the sun. And we just need to realize that we're always going through growth. We're always going through adjustment. And of course, my message is always, as much as you can, look toward the light, try to be a positive component of change upon the planet, or just simply be kind. Sometimes being kind to people is the biggest thing. So I thank you to all the kind drivers out there this morning. Thank you so much. Yeah. We are a listener-supported show. Thank you for my supporters. You can be a part of this show by going to patreon.com/The Loretta Brown Show and contribute whatever you would like. Anything is welcome, and my gratitude is eternally with you. You will there's a blessing that always comes with an act of goodness. We made it to autumn. We made it to October. We're in the countdown to Halloween. Some people are counting down to the holidays already. Yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
can't say. I
can't
never
do it.
understand why there's Christmas items up now, even before there's 2 major holidays before that.
I
I don't.
can't do
I
it.
just don't understand. I don't get it.
But
I mean, I get it, but I don't
yeah.
want to.
But I do like the color of the leaves. I like
Oh
everything
man.
going on. It's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely beautiful. Yesterday I was driving to the office and it was sunny and the leaves were blowing across the road and I went, "Wow, this is truly
I
beautiful."
was dodging a lot of those.
Yeah, were you? So
Shouldn't have been, but I was.
take a moment at this time of year in fall. This is a time where the energies are really changing. Take a moment and look back over your past year and ponder a little bit, where have I come from? What was going on last fall? And as the fall leaves fall, right, it's a great time to let go of things and to already begin to think about, what do I want to put into the earth to come up next spring? There's those bulbs you plant in the fall and then they come up in the spring. And I always thought that was magical when my mother did that. I'd be like, you're putting stuff in the ground and then winter's coming. And then I'd be running out there all the time wondering when the plants were going to start to come up. It was very exciting for me when the plants would be coming up. Now, many of you have been coming to me talking about love problems, relationship problems, and many people have been feeling extremely sad that they don't have a love relationship. So you're going to be glad to hear what I have to say about Venus today, the planet of love. The event of the month of October is, of course, Venus retrograde in Scorpio. Now that sounds frightening, but just stick with me. Venus retrograde in Scorpio, and Venus changes her course on October 5th, which I believe is tomorrow, if I'm right, at 10 degrees Scorpio, and she will stay retrograde until November 15th. This is one of the most intense Venus retrogrades we have had in a while. Why? Firstly, because it's in that intense Scorpio. And usually, anytime someone says Scorpio, people said, okay, I got it. That's enough said. Don't say anything else. But Scorpio is a sign of change and transformation. After any serious Scorpio transit, something inside you changes forever. Now, once you emerge from the storm, you're never the same person again. And I have to tell you that, sometimes we see that storm coming or we find out we're in the middle of it and we get all kind of bonkered up because it's a storm. The storm will pass. And when it passes, you will be different. So Scorpio is the sign of hidden things. And Venus retrograde will expose your most hidden secrets, especially those related to love and relationships. So no matter how happy your relationships are, there's always stuff buried deep inside, and it might not be bad stuff. Don't always think it's bad. Venus retrograde will dive into the underworld to expose this buried stuff. This is personal, and of course, it's global. When Venus is retrograde, she is, in fact, in a perfect alignment with the Earth and the Sun. Venus disappears in the rays of the Sun to dive into the metaphorical underworld where she gets purified. So when Venus is retrograde, the pull of self-transformation is so strong, we cannot ignore it. Whether or not you're aware of it yet, you too are ready to dive in. Venus retrograde makes an intense opposition to Uranus, the planet of unexpected change, freedom, and liberation. Usually one Uranus transit is enough to break the chains of illusion, but this time we have an unusually long Uranus transit because of Venus's back and forth motion. So because it takes so long, like I said, it's going to go till November 15th, the Venus-Uranus opposition will break the strongest chains, those chains you thought were impossible to break, and possibly those chains you have been wanting to break. You want to break out into something new, don't you? Ultimately, the Venus-Uranus opposition will liberate us from the prison of our outdated selves, that old dusty stuff we keep carrying around, so that we can have mature, meaningful, and authentic relationships And for some of you, you're going to say to me, it's about time, Loretta. I'm ready to step into love and living life at a higher level. So, exhale, everybody. Take a big, deep breath. Realize that the heart is powerful, and yet it's also tender. Always, always, always send yourself love and be kind to your own self, for goodness sakes. There's enough going on out there, don't you think, Benny?
Yes, and be kind to others as far as when you're driving around. I know you mentioned earlier real fast before we get to our guest for today. Stop for buses. Apparently, Bellevue now is fining up to $400 or more, $415. I'm just now reading this on Q13. Fox.
Wow.
Yeah. So Bellevue's stepping up their game, and I think everyone just slow down. It's not that fast. It's for the children. It's our hope. It's our future. Figure it out.
I'm glad you brought that
and
up.
I still think 400 is not enough.
Yeah, I do
It's ridiculous. You're going around buses? Come on.
Yeah. And the buses always stop and they put that little stop sign
That's
out.
what they're referring to, yeah. So they're going to add, actually, the idea is to add more cameras to those so they can catch the cars that do not stop and go around to find them afterwards. So, that's in the Bellevue area. I'm sure other schools and districts will be figuring that out, too. So $419 ticket at this point.
Wow.
I still don't think that's enough.
You know, it's important to know that when that little stop sign comes out next to the bus, that's the lanes to the left.
Well, if you're unsure, just go online to the Washington State Department of State, Patrol, and everyone remembers going through the driver's test. Some people forget which ones. It does stop on. If you're behind a bus, you definitely have to. Do not pass. If there's a double yellow though with more than lanes, the oncoming traffic though does not have to stop. It's only for the forgrowth traffic. So, anyways, if you're unsure, just check things out.
Yeah, just check things out. Yeah, I noticed this morning the bus had pulled over into. Maybe it was a turn lane because it's right near a corner, but it's not right on the corner. So there's actually two lanes to the left, and the person in front of me, I could tell, wasn't sure if they were supposed to.
I would still stop.
And I stopped.
Safe than sorry.
Yep.
I mean, really.
Yep.
It's not. It's gonna kill 10 seconds?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not much, and
That's
it
about
is
it.
our children. So thanks for listening to that, all
Let's
of
do
you.
it. Let's do
Beautiful,
it.
safe, kind, loving, caring
That'd be like
drivers.
some of the
entities
in the stars.
Absolutely.
That's shaking things up.
Yeah.
Let her do her thing.
I like it.
Okay.
So I'm going to bring my guest onto the show. We were speaking about love before we talked about school buses, which, by the way, is love. And my guest today is Lynn Robinson, PhD. She's written a book filled with love stories that is actually a book about dying. Her book is called Loving to the End and On, a guide to the impossibly possible. And in this book, it's a very touching book. It's actually an easy read. Lynn offers touchingly personal and well-researched accounts of deathbed visions, after-death communication, near-death experiences, and other unexpected occurrences around the time of death, dying, and a person transitioning. Lynn is a business professor, a management consultant, a hospice volunteer, an intuitive and after-death communicator, and a member of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And she is the author of actually several books. So welcome to the show, Lynn.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I do want to say it's Lynn B. Robinson. There's a Lynn A. Robinson in Boston, and I'm on the Gulf Coast. And Lynn A. Robinson is a wonderful human being. She also writes books on intuition and is a management consultant. And we found each other about 20 years ago. So I'm Lynn B. Robinson.
So she's Lynn A. and you're Lynn B.
That's correct.
Thank you for that clarification. And I got quantified on that also. And it's important to note, very important. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get from the business world into the subject of death and receiving messages from those who have passed to the other side?
Well, I really didn't get from one to the other. I've had them all balled up together in my life for an awfully long time. And in some ways, I had one foot in one world and one foot in another. And when I have been in the world of being a college professor and department chair and head of an MBA program in the College of Business and consulting with all sorts of firms from mom and pop shops to Fortune 500 companies, I didn't really share a whole lot about talking to people who are no longer in their physical bodies. I did, however, count on my intuition hugely in that work, and as a way to sometimes get a little more insight into especially what business executives were thinking and feeling. And it's as much intuitive as it is empathetic. If you're willing to open yourself to your feelings and as well as your knowings and not just recitations of what you may have read in somebody else's book. So that's how I used it. And then once I had resigned from the university and I was given emeritus status, that's when I published Coming Out of Your Psychic Closet, How to Unlock Your Naturally Intuitive Self. And from there, I began doing a lot more work with intuition and with opening yourself to the possibility of talking to your loved ones who are no longer in their physical bodies and being willing to talk about that to other people because it has happened to me. And by the way, if I could talk just a minute longer, that is one thing I'm so excited about. This book was published in late July. It became available for people to purchase. And gradually, over time, as more and more people have read it, I've been getting feedback on the openness that they feel after reading the book, that they can talk about their stories to other people. I had an email yesterday from a good friend who said, and she's an extremely successful businesswoman, and she had shared my book with her banker and was talking about the book with him, and he said, my father died just recently, and I had a dream about him. It was so real, I thought we were talking to each other, and he said, I just want to make sure you're okay. I am. And he has 3 brothers. He called all 3 brothers, and they had exactly the same dream the same night.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that wonderful?
That's exciting.
I just love that story. I just learned it yesterday.
I love what you just said because just before we got on the air, I was saying to Lynn what an important subject this is. We have a tendency as a society not to want to look at death and dying, and it's kind of inevitable. I mean, we're all going to go through it, right? We came in, we're going to go out, and we're scared to death of it. Which is kind of a bad statement. We're scared to death of death. But it's a difficult subject. And also what you said about you've always used your intuition, but you didn't really tell people. I have so many people come to me and they'll say, do you think that I'm psychic? And I'm like, of course you are. Everybody is.
Oh, yeah.
But that's also something we don't talk about. So here you are in this realm where, and I agree with you too. I think your book, even me reading it, just it opens you somehow. I sometimes think that things have, maybe a divine presence with them or something. That's my belief. You don't have to believe it, but there is something about it. It was like I found myself exhaling. And I was also remembering experiences I've had with the death and dying. So can you talk just a little bit about, first of all, what is intuition? And then I want to go into some of the things from your book, more stories, I suppose you might say, about death and dying and what happens there.
Well, I think the shortest way that I talk about intuition is saying it's knowing you know something without knowing how you know. And that's my brief answer. A longer-winded answer might be to say that it's insight, it's an access to information that is simply available, to senses that do not require conscious thought, don't require scrunching up your brain if you want, and trying to go back through the pages of what you've been taught from whenever onward, and being open to whatever insight comes. I've gotten to the point, and this has been true for me for sort of years. To me, I talk about changing channels.
Mm.
It's as though when I'm using my ability to think and process information, or not to think but be open to information, it's almost as though there are a set of channels I can choose among, and that's where I go. It used to be that people would measure brain frequency, the actual output of energy from the brain, and they talked about alpha, delta, beta, theta frequency levels, and they thought that people could only work in one of those levels at a time, and one of them represents deep sleep. And that was blown apart, and I think it was the McGill University study many, many years ago in Canada, where they had a medium who was hooked up to not a medium, a healer, a natural healer, hooked up to someone who was ill, and they had separate measurement devices on his head and her head. And as she was working on him, and you do Reiki, so you probably get what I'm talking about, as she was working on him, and the instrumentation measured that she went from beta, which is a very fast frequency, down to delta, which was much slower, that the person on whom she was working, brain frequencies followed hers, and were in sync.
Wow.
And that's the first time they had ever seen that. So that's an example of an actual measured frequency change that was occurring with people doing different things with their mental capacities. And I say mental now loosely because I think it's beyond that, and we just haven't learned how to talk about it or measure it yet.
Yeah. I like that idea of the brainwave syncing up and that verification of that.
Yeah.
Did you always communicate with the deceased, or did you just realize it? Because I have people come to me and they'll say, my child is seeing someone, at the end of the bed or something. And did you have experiences like that, or is this just something that you just came to the awareness of somewhere along the line?
I think I became aware of it along the way, though I do remember an imaginary play friend when I was preschool age, who I'm not sure now was imaginary.
Yeah.
It may have been someone not in a physical body, but I just called it an imaginary play friend. I think a lot of people have those.
Yeah. Yeah, I had that a lot, and I remember one day my mother telling me not to tell people about my imaginary friends, right? and then I wasn't sure. Are they real or are they imaginary? They seem pretty real, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But, the development of the brain over time causes us to think and use our brain skills differently as it develops, and we do develop more rational thinking capacity, and that part of the brain becomes more active. So we do change over time, but that doesn't mean we have to lose the other capacity. So sometimes I think our schooling makes us so concentrate on rational, logical thinking and doesn't allow us as much to do the fanciful, imaginary thinking may move us in that direction. But if we open up, it's just there.
Yeah. Yeah. I always kind of wish we could help children develop both those aspects, like the intuitive and the rational, somehow maybe do a better job of that in the schools or in our homes. What advice can you give people just connecting to their intuitive abilities? Because there's a lot of people, I feel like there's kind of a general nudge to wake up in this area.
The first thing is to give it recognition. I mean, so many people just dismiss it as versus, they'll say, I have a hunch. that's a word that people can hold on to instead of I have an intuitive thought. And hunches are the same thing as intuitive thoughts or intuitive knowing. And so pay attention to your hunches, and when they pan out, say, oh, yeah, that's intuition, and I have it, and I can use it, and it can be helpful.
I love that. Yeah, and the hunch. And also following through, once we have a hunch and then we realize it's true or real, I think we begin to develop that muscle of trusting that. And I kind of think that's sort of what people do. And then once again, back to what you said earlier, being able to talk about it and find out that you're not alone in these experiences is powerful.
I think so, too. In my book, in addition to the stories of what happens at end of life, there are also a couple of chapters on things that help you traverse the physical things that you just have to go through with caring for someone who is dying and so forth. And I also have the chapter on listening skills. And Ned Herman's model for understanding how we listen is also a model on understanding some patterns of thought. And some of us really do have a tendency to go more to intuitive thought and be open to that. And others really are more analytical and have a tendency to go there. So, if you can marry that up with others, some of the guys I used to do a lot of management consulting with when we did it as a team, who were very rational, logical, procedural in their approach to things, and we would develop some process that we were going to do with some group of executives in whatever corporation, and we'd get there and start working with them, and sometimes what we had planned ahead of time wasn't working, and so we bow out at lunch or something and say, we'll see you guys later, and we'd put our heads together, and frequently they'd say, okay, Lynn, you do your thing. And I would close my eyes and say, okay, just be quiet for a few minutes, and I would switch channels with an objective in mind, and the objective was to figure out where we were steering wrong and get us on a different path. And then I'd sit up and say, okay, here are 2 or 3 alternatives. What's going to work best for all of us? And we'd go back and we'd get things back on track. And so my point is, they recognized that I had some sort of intuitive process that they didn't. And then I would come up with the intuitive concept, and sometimes they would add the structure to it. So that's the thing for teamwork. And you can have that same kind of teamwork in caring for people who are dying.
I'm actually thrilled by what you just said. I'm sitting with it because I can see that working in end-of-life care. I can see it working in business model. I can see it working in family life, all areas. Yeah. That's a great way to work. We are going to take a break. Believe it or not, this is the original Loretta Brown Show, and my guest today is Lynn B. Robinson. We're talking about her book, Loving to the End and On, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about deathbed visions, after-death communication, near-death experiences, and other unexpected occurrences at the time of transition. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Energy is powerful. It's all around us, mysterious, full of potential. Directing positive, healing energy to raise your vibrational rate through Reiki can change your life. Reiki Master Loretta Brown has relieved stress, sadness, anger, and even helped clients lose weight, stop smoking, and end sleep disorders. Worldwide, people have sought out Reiki Oasis. If you want help with your dis-ease, visit ReikiOasis.com. Harness life's energy. Visit ReikiOasis.com today.
The stigma of addiction is destroying lives across the country, preventing our loved ones from getting the help they need. We are Shatterproof, a national nonprofit dedicated to ending the stigma and devastation addiction causes families. We are changing laws, creating a community of support, and providing evidence-based resources for prevention, treatment, and recovery. Stigma shatters lives. Rise up against addiction now so another life isn't lost. Get involved at shatterproof.org/riseup.
Let angels and Reiki and the search for mystical knowledge become a regular part of your routine Thursday mornings at 8 a.m. Loretta Brown, owner of Reiki Oasis, Reiki Master Teacher, an angel messenger, and healing musician, all wrapped into one as she uses her voice to share knowledge of great mysteries, energetic laws, and messages of love from the divine. Join her and her show every Thursday morning at 8 a.m. to open your heart and heal your soul. Visit ReikiOasis.com for more information about her show.
Alternative Talk 1150. We're on your radio at 1150 a.m. We're on your HD radio at 98.9 Channel 3.
So many ways to listen.
We're on the web at 1150kknw.com, streaming live audio and video as well as MP3 archives of many of our shows.
So many ways to listen.
And now, we're on your smartphone or tablet. Download our free app in the Apple App Store or Google Play and take Alternative Talk 1150 anywhere you go.
So many ways to listen.
Radio with no added hormones or preservatives. All natural Alternative Talk 1150 AM.
Welcome back to the original Loretta Brown Show. I'm the owner of Reiki Oasis, located right here in the greater Seattle area. Yay! You can find out more about me at ReikiOasis.com. And, of course, you can find the archived radio shows, all free download, hours and hours and hours of uninterrupted listening. That's right. At the archives for the original Loretta Brown Show at KKNW or at thelorettabrown.show.com. My guest today is Lynn B. Robinson. B for better, best, fantastic. Just trying to help people out, Lynn. And we're talking about her book, Loving to the End and On, a guide to the impossibly possible. Lynn, what do you mean the impossibly possible?
Well, I mean, it's what so many people think is impossible, and I don't.
Yay.
Because I talk to people who are no longer in physical bodies. And so that's a way of putting my hat actually to some family who are finally beginning to change their minds a little bit, and friends who say, oh, Lynn, you can't really do that, but you can. So that's what I mean. It's just a little twist of words to get people to think, and thank you for asking.
I'm sorry. I was just giggling in joy to hear you so clearly say, I talk to people who are not in physical bodies. Just that's what I do. I love that. I just love it so much because it's absolutely real and true, at least in my reality, and makes me happy just to hear you say it. You know, many people talk about, their dearly beloveds passing on, and they quite often share little tidbits of things. They'll say things like, well, there was this bird outside my window, and it just kept looking at me until I looked at it, and do you think that was Uncle Joe, right? Or they'll see a dragonfly or butterflies or something. Do you have any stories of these types of things, and how does this work?
Well, that's really fascinating that you just asked that question, because I just had an article published about two birds.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
So you really are intuitive, are you not?
I hope so.
Yes. And I think in the book I also mentioned when a cousin of mine was dying of brain cancer, when she could still talk, and I said something to her about, okay, how am I know you're going to be okay after you die? Because she was open to this sort of thing. Her siblings are not, but she was. And she thought a minute, and she said, well, just look for the butterfly or the butterflies. And I said, okay. So they have a family burial plot sort of out in the country a little bit. So we'd all ridden up there. And as they were saying whatever was being said at graveside before they lowered the casket into the ground, about, I don't even know how many, at least 100 yellow butterflies swarmed in and around the grave and through all of us who were there by the side of the grave. And I just grinned from ear to ear. I had had this conversation with her, but hadn't told anybody else because they weren't going to believe me anyway, and I didn't want to upset them. But, I just loved it because this was her agreement before she died, and there they were. Not one, but a swarm. There's another story in the book about someone's mother who said, who had this one bird that came back every year. I don't remember what season, and the same bird would come back and be in the tree, or the same species of bird. And she laughingly said to her girls one time, who were there visiting because they lived in different states, once I'm gone, I'll come back as one of those birds, and you'll know I'm okay. And they kind of laughed about it. Well, the sister who told me said, when my sister was at Mother's house cleaning it out, and she was reminiscing as going through things, and she looked outside the window, and the tree had a flock of those birds in the tree, and it wasn't the right season for the bird.
Oh.
So that was pretty compelling for me. Now, what happened to me recently, I had two good friends die within a few months of each other. One was a guy who no longer lived here on the Gulf Coast, and the other was a woman who had. And we had been friends, since childhood. I was very close to both of them. The male who died was absolutely brilliant, and I won't go into all of his whatevers, but after he died, I learned that he had been part of a bird study that he counted the birds and the species that came through his backyard and submitted them to some bird study that's being done in the United States. But I had never known that about him. So at any rate, a few months after he died, I had some painters in the house. Make a long story short, I saw a bird tapped on the window in one of the rooms where I was standing with painters, and just tapped until I paid attention. Then we moved across the hall into another bedroom, and the bird came with us and tapped on the window. Long story short, over about 2 weeks, that bird would appear at, on 2 different floors of the house in 7 different rooms, and tap on the window until I gave it recognition. He even did that one time to my husband in what I call his man study, the same thing. And so that went on for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I was sitting in a chair in my bedroom, and I heard the tap on the window, and I looked up, and there were 2 birds, and one of them was female. Oh, by the way, during this process, I had looked in bird books to try to find this bird, and never could. I can't identify it. I can't tell you what kind of bird it was. I can't find it in the bird books. And so there was a female, and they tapped on the window together until I gave them recognition, and then they came back one more time and did it, and then I never saw them again. And in retrospect, thinking about that, and it was obviously a female of the same species because similar coloring, not the same beak, etc. And so I have laughingly said to myself, did they team up together, to play that? She was very open to this sort of thing. He was tolerant. Though he had a bad, as I say, he was a minister. I had a PhD in theology. He could translate Greek and Greek from Greek to English, etc. He was absolutely brilliant, and he was very tolerant of all this. And maybe because when we were in high school, he was injured on the football field as a freshman in high school and had a brain injury. And he could never play sports again. But during that time, I think, in retrospect, he had a near-death experience. It was before Dr. Moody coined that term. But in some of his descriptions of what happened while he was injured and in surgery, I think he had a near-death experience, so he was very tolerant of that sort of thing. So that's an incident with those two birds. Can I tell you absolutely, definitely, that was my two friends borrowing birds' bodies, or however did they? No, I can't tell you that. I can't say that's my friend, but I believe it was, and I believe they were fooling with me. And we were and I mean, I could laugh and giggle with them just as though they were right here, because we all laughed a lot together. Besides being serious sometimes.
You know, I agree with you. These things, like you say, can you absolutely say, well, no, but my goodness, you know, the connection with that is kind of undeniable. I have a real quick little story I was thinking of while you were talking. One of my clients shared with me a while back that her father passed, and he was a duck hunter. And the hysterical thing was that, because I think everyone has a sense of humor and they want us to laugh at some point. So the morning of the funeral, she goes out to get in her car, and there were ducks all over the place.
That's right.
And she said, well, I guess they came to make sure he was gone, right? And it was a message from her father, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
But and that's what I hope some people will get from reading the book, is looking at things differently. I have a friend who told me recently, I ran into her in a parking lot somewhere. I hadn't seen her in a long time, and we had a mutual friend they had gone to school together. I had gone to different schools, but they were both Catholic, and they went to parochial schools. But we went, Brownie Scouts and Girl Scouts, and went away to camp together, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so the one still living said to me, when she died, and this has been probably at least 8 years ago that she died, before she died, because she was quite sick till the end, and she said, before she died, I said, okay, how am I going to know you're okay? And she said, just look on the ground and you're going to find money. And they laughed about that. And just recently she said, every time I think about her and look at the ground, I found a coin. Still, to this day.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love these stories.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple of questions for you. What is, for my listeners who may not know, what is a near-death experience?
Well, the near-death experience is a term coined by a physician, Raymond Moody, who tracked what happens with people who literally lose measurement of life, that is, pulse, brainwave frequency, and those sorts of things. And then for some reason, those faculties come back, and they tell stories of what happened while they were presumably dead, but then were not. And that's why he called it a near-death experience. There are some people who feel that that's a misnomer, but because they did actually die, so it wasn't near-death, because they feel they died and were resuscitated. So they would call it something like a death resuscitation experience. But Ray Moody came up with near-death experience, and that's what we call it now. And there are legions of these people. Finally, some of the physicians and nurses who themselves have had NDEs are writing their own books and making it more physiologically understandable. But at the same time, they are saying, I died. I'm back. And here's what it was like when I was no longer in a physical body, but was in some other understanding of life.
Thank you for that. I myself have had two what would be called near-death experiences, and I was pondering while you were talking as to, was I really dead? Was I alive? And I just know I was someplace else having an experience and then came back. And that would be something to think more about. Kind of along that same line, but different, what is an after-death experience? And you are an after-death communicator. So what is an after-death experience?
Well, an after-death experience would be more like a near-death experience.
Okay.
Somebody has died and come back. But an after-death communicator is someone like myself who talks to people who are no longer in their physical bodies, who gets messages. Now, I use the term talk loosely because it may come in the form of pictures. It could come in the form of smell. It could come in the form of some sound, not necessarily words, but other sounds that would be recognizable in some way. So whatever way we can pick things up in a physical body, whatever sensory input we can get, and then translate. One of the stories that I like to tell is when I used to swim a lot, and if I was grading exams or something and had them at home and I have a pool in the backyard, I'd take a break so that I'd come back fresh and I'd go swim. And I was lying in the pool looking at the sun once and saw what wasn't a cloud, but something else up there that was starting to take shape and so forth, and I started paying attention, and I began seeing essentially in my mind, but because of something that in the sky that was triggering this, pictures, and I finally realized I just got a sensation that this was the wife of one of my best faculty friends, and she was showing me pictures. And then and this is before I'd ever talked to him about this. We've talked about it a lot since. But I finally knocked on his office door at the university and said, "There's something I have to tell you. Do you have a minute?" So I said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but," I used his wife's name, and I said, she talked to me, she showed me a bunch of pictures, and I don't know what they mean, so I'm going to tell them to you. And this is why I think it's verifiable. All these pictures that I recorded in my mind, I had no idea what they meant, but that I needed to tell him. So one of them turned out to be something that was strictly between the two of them. No one else knew about it. And it was something he had given her. It was a physical something. Excuse me. And so he said, "I'm going to tell you this. Nobody else knows, but I'm verifying that it could only have come from her because we're the only two people who could have known it." And then he said, "But I have no idea about the other things. You'll have to ask one of the girls." I said, "Oh, I can't." His two daughters. I said, "I can't tell them." And he said, this is before I was quite as fluent talking about these sorts of things, still sort of holding back. And he said, "Well, you have to because I can't." At that very moment, there was a knock on his door to the office. He opened it, and there was one of the two daughters.
Oh.
And he said, "Lynn has something to tell you. I've got to go to a meeting." Bye. And he left. So then I told her what was going on, and she said, "Oh, I can tell you exactly what that is, and I think I can even go home and find it." And it has something to do with doll clothes or something that, her daddy wouldn't have known.
Right.
And, of course, then she burst into tears, and, we could hug a lot. And she said, "Why can't I talk to her?" And I said, "You can. Just do it."
Mm-hmm.
And so she started talking to her mom. Did her mom get the message? Probably. I can't say that for sure. But the whole family opened up to this potential after that because I had no way of knowing what any of that stuff was. None.
Right.
And she was able to get it, the wife, mother, was able to get the pictures across to me so clearly that I could get it to them. And once I had the message, by the way, my awareness of her, whatever that little something in the sky that I was seeing, poof, it was gone.
Mm.
Now, I didn't hear words from her like I do sometimes from people. It was all in pictures. Now, how did she do that? I don't know. I can't tell you that.
Right. I'm thinking while you're talking about, some of my listeners may be thinking to themselves, well, so how does an opening awareness that we can communicate with those that are dying and passing, how can we bring this into the process of dying? You've been a hospice volunteer and you've worked at the bedside. How does all this help? What advice can you give people? Like I'm like listening, because sometimes near the end people are, maybe they're not quite as lucid, or they're telling you, like, I think I'm seeing, grandma in the room or something. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, they often do see people in the room, and there are a number of examples of that in the book. One of my favorites, though, is the grandmother. She was in her hundreds, and like 102 or something. And when she was dying, she wasn't talking to them about seeing. They played. She loved Elvis Presley. This is a couple of years ago. She was like 102, and she loved Elvis Presley's gospel songs, and they were playing those for her because they knew hearing is the last thing to go. Not always sure it's actual physical hearing as much as just whatever kind of hearing, but then you can see something in the body react. In this instance, she's minutes away from death, and she lifts her fingers up and starts keeping time to the music, which is a wonderful affirmation for the whole family. They still grin when they talk about it because they were playing her favorite music, and she let them know that she heard it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if you're holding somebody's hand and you telling them you love them, they may actually be able to squeeze it a little bit. The eyes may flutter. There have been instances, I know, instance of one very famous scientist who stayed away from the office, and he stayed home with his wife, and she was in a coma for quite some time before she died, and he would read to her, and he was reading to her from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and he said, and then while he was reading from the part about the bardo, which is in between death and in between life and death, she actually opened her eyes and sat up and said, I want to tell you about that. That's where I am now. She told him a few sentences, closed her eyes, laid back down. She never opened her eyes again, and she died, a few weeks later.
Wow.
So the thing is, you just have to try. You can speak. You can squeeze somebody's hand. You can get in bed and snuggle with them as they're lying there. Their body may not feel the same, and it's going to lose temperature over time. And when they're actually dying, eventually it'll be quite cold. But that'll be after they've lost the lifetime. So that's what you can do is talk to them, sing to them, play their favorite music, hold their hand, and just be open. Be open to the probability that they know what you're doing, and be open to you may get some signal that they know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You may not. Then you just have to have the confidence and the faith that they do, because there's so many stories and so many instances of verification that does indeed occur.
Yeah. And I'm being with, as you're talking, because there's I don't know if I want to call it a space or an attitude, but there's this opportunity to talk about things that might normally be awkward, or to feel a little more intimate with people. And maybe that's the love, the title of your book, Loving to the End and On.
Absolutely. And there is a certain kind of intimacy, and sometimes the people who are dying are trying to protect the living because they think, oh, this is such a horrible, subject. We don't talk about this in our culture, but the very act of talking about it creates an intimacy because it is something that it's real. It's the final act of living. Mm-hmm. So you're a participant in your loved one's final act of living in a physical body. And that's marvelous. That's like, they're taking you to the prom.
Mm-hmm. So do you think your book will help people be less afraid of death and dying?
That's a big leap.
Yeah.
But I'm hopeful that it will, and I'm hopeful that it will because if more people are willing to discuss these things with each other and to tell each other the happy stories, because there are some sad ones. I mean, face it, there are. But there are all these happy stories of how can be with your loved one to that very end. And I mean, the first chapter of it's about one of my dearest childhood friends and her husband in this. She puts her head on his chest and hears his last breath and heartbeat. He leaves his body. She goes with him.
Wow. That's a beautiful story. So,
Get the book.
Lynn B. Robinson, it's
book.
been great to have you on the show. The book is Loving to the End and On. And people can find you at lynnbrobinson.com. You can buy the book on amazon.com and many, many other places. Thank you so much, Lynn. And everyone out there, love to the end and on. We'll talk to you next time.
The views expressed on this program are those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of KKNW, its management, or other advertisers. Contests are the responsibility of the host of this program and not KKNW. This is Alternative Talk 1150 AM, KKNW Seattle, and KNUC 98.9 HD3 Seattle.
And good morning to you. Benny Mathers here for a look at your Alternative Talk